The wealth of the 1% just hit a record $44 trillion. And not only is that essentially an unfathomable amount of wealth, but 15 trillion of that came in just the last 4 years since the 2020 pandemic. Now, if you're wondering where all of this money came from, basically all of it has come from stocks. This is a graph of the wealth of the 1%. What they own in the entirety of their net worth, so their assets, their stocks, real estate, and so on and so forth. And as you can see, this graph closely mirrors the stock market. This is the Dow Jones Industrial Average, so it's pretty close to a pretty good indicator of what the economy is looking like. And if we look since 2010, when this graph starts recording, we can see these little dips here with a big dip there, and that's basically what we're seeing in 2010. Little dips here with a big dip there, and then it continues to go up. So the primary driver of wealth for the top 1% is the amount that they own in stocks and shares of companies, whether private, and also probably the price of their real estate has been spiking a lot recently, which brings up the entirety of their net worth to the astounding figure of specifically $44.6 trillion. Now, some of the size of this number is because the GDP of the United States is the largest it has ever been. When the value of total goods and services increases, we expect to see the amount of money held in stocks grow as well. And that is what we are seeing here. As you can see in this graph of the United States GDP, obviously it took a dip for the pandemic, but by and large, it is grown tremendously, almost doubling in the last 16 years or so. And so we would expect the amount of wealth held by people that hold a lot of wealth to increase along with the GDP. The important measure of how much wealth the top 1% owns is not the specific number, in this case 45 trillion, but the percentage of the total wealth that they control. And I actually have bad news for that as well. That number is also depressing. Investopedia put out this article. It says, what is the average net worth of the top 1%? And then it goes through a lot of mumbo jumbo that we don't need to worry about. But the interesting thing is here. The bottom line, like the poor, the rich are always with us. Disparity in income is inevitable in a capitalist society and a free enterprise economy. However, the fact that the disparity seems to be increasing is a source of growing concern for many. In the United States, the share of the nation's wealth held by the top 1% increased from 23% to nearly 32% between 1989 and 2018. The amount of wealth held by the 1% continues to grow. So not only is the total number of the wealth, that $45 trillion going up, but also the percent of the total wealth that the top 1% controls is increasing as well. And that is a pretty significant cause for concern. And we'll talk more about the negative economic impacts that could have later on. But first, I want to say that it's not all 100% bad. There are bad parts that need to be discussed and addressed and legislated, but the entirety of the situation is not all doom and gloom. And that's for several reasons. The first of which being, it's actually pretty good for people that are retiring that the stock market has had such a huge rally in the last few years, because retiring people now have significantly more money if they were invested in stocks than they would had the economy grown at a normal pace. And this is good because we are in the midst of a retirement crisis. As you can see here, Bernie Sanders put out this report. It's from a committee that he sits on, but here's some key points of the report he put out. Nearly half of Americans 55 and older have no retirement savings. 52% of Americans 65 and older are living on less than $30,000 annually, and 1 in 4 survive on less than $15,000 per year. Nearly 5.3 million Americans 65 and older live in poverty, roughly 1 in 10 seniors. Nearly half of all Americans are at risk of financially insecure retirement, up from 1 in 3 workers in 1983. The average annual monthly Social Security benefit of 2023 was only $1,782 or $21,000 a year, and the top 20% of earners receive 63% of the $202 billion in annual income tax breaks for retirement accounts, while the bottom 60% receive just 13.4% of these breaks. Now, this is from Bernie Sanders, who is a far left-leaning politician, so we expect this information to be at least somewhat biased towards a point that he's trying to make, But we can also back up these numbers by looking at other publications. What is the average retirement savings by age? And this is from NerdWallet, which tends to be a pretty reputable website. And you can see, according to the Survey of Consumer Finances, the average retirement savings for all families was $33,940. The average retirement saving balance for Americans varies by age, with those 55 and older having the highest balance in their accounts. On average, Americans have only saved 78% of the amount they need in order to retire, according to a Fidelity study. With retirement being so underfunded for most people, a huge stock market rally is really good because it means that the value of their investments has shot up in the last few years. Now, to be fair, this does benefit the wealthy as well as the people who are not so wealthy, but this could be the difference between someone being able to retire this year and either cash out their retirement and just purchase government bonds, which have a good steady yield, or putting it into a high yield savings account or cash it out into an annuity, and the difference between that and someone having to work for another 4, 5, or 6 years into their 70s before they can actually retire and take the break they've earned. Now, the second reason this is good is this thing called the wealth effect, and this is directly from Wikipedia. The wealth effect is the change in spending that accompanies a change in perceived wealth. Usually, the wealth effect is positive. Spending changes in the same direction as perceived wealth. Changes in a consumer's wealth cause changes in the amount and distribution of his or her consumption. People typically spend more overall when one of two things is true: when people are richer objectively, or when people perceive themselves to be richer. For example, and this is important, the assessed value of their homes or a stock they own goes up in price. When people see the value of their stocks go up, they are more likely to spend more money because they feel more financially secure. And more people spending more money is vital for a healthy and thriving economy. And a healthy and thriving economy benefits everyone. Now that I've gone over a couple of good things, I think we can break into the bad things with the top 1% owning so much wealth. And right off the bat, I'm sure you can think of a lot of things like tax evasion leading to underfunded social programs, rich people buying up a lot of single-family home real estate in order to turn it into rentals. But those two everyone knows about. I think the biggest issue that not a lot of people talk about is how much power you get when you have such an intense concentration of wealth at the top. When you have this much wealth and power, you can influence politics by lobbying and donating to the campaigns of politicians who will pass laws that will allow you to get more and more rich, even if those laws that allow you to get more and more rich aren't actually what's best for the economy and the people in it. It's a pretty common argument to say that someone else having $1 billion does not negatively impact your life if you have less than $1 billion. But it actually does if they use that $1 billion in wealth to influence politicians to pass laws that do negatively impact me. Think about things like having enough money to beat SEC antitrust lawsuits, or internet service providers creating local monopolies so that you don't have any other options and have to pay high prices for terrible service, or keeping the minimum wage low and as such you're unable to afford reasonable housing. A ton of wealth being owned by other people does not in and of itself negatively impact my life. What does is that when the wealth that's owned by these people is used in order to influence policies that do negatively impact my life, which is what a lot of billionaires are choosing to do with their wealth and power. Now, with every discussion of wealth, soon comes a discussion of wealth tax. And I just have to say, realistically, I don't think a wealth tax would work. If you want to know details on it, Marketplace did a really good article called Why is it so difficult for the US to implement a wealth tax? And there's lots of stuff breaking it down, the pros, the cons, why it would be difficult, how it might benefit the economy, how it might also negatively impact the economy. It's a really good article. I highly encourage you to go read it. But basically, it's just too complicated for the United States to be able to reasonably implement a good wealth tax, especially when the IRS is as underfunded as it is. And in addition to that, billionaires would spend basically all of their time trying to get around such a wealth tax. And reasonably, they would probably be able to do it either via hiding their wealth or by lobbying to get laws changed so that they could exploit loopholes. A better idea would be higher taxes against stock buybacks, or taxing loans taken out against stocks, or other stuff like that. A more indirect wealth tax. So basically, the wealthy own more than they ever have at any other point in human history, and that disparity between the rich and the poor continues to grow. Thanks for watching.